Okay, hi, humans. For the month of October, we have 4 weeks, and I've got 4 parts on Wendan Tang. So this is, literally warm the gallbladder decoction, and people argue about did it really mean warm? It says warm, but did it really mean warm? That's not my argument. Anyway, this first part is a couple of cases on fright. But before we talk about that, we kind of have to just look briefly at the formula. I like to trace formulas back to, their earliest iteration. And it's hard with some formulas because, well, some people say that this is the earliest book that has Wendan Tang in it. So, it was written by Chen Yan in the Song Dynasty. But there are earlier versions of it, but there are differences. Like some of the earlier versions don't have Fu Ling, but they're still called Wendan Tang and they have everything else. So I don't know. But we're going with this because I'm pretty sure this is what Bensky says is the first um, Wendan Tang. So anyway, Chen Yan wrote this book, and it's an important book. But here's what he said. Well, he had 3 recipes for Wendan Tang, and 2 are almost exactly identical, but one of them is quite different. Anyway, so let's look at this one of his versions. It treats heart and gallbladder deficiency with timidity and fright that's easily triggered by events. So somebody who everything makes them scared and makes them want to hide away. They may have inauspicious dreams or unusual delusions. This results in a frightened heart and an intimidated gallbladder. Gallbladder is in charge of courage, and so it's not good when it's intimidated. Chi constraint engenders drool. So in the Song Dynasty, they didn't use the word phlegm very much, but they often use the word drool or xian, which is the fluid of the spleen. Here it is over here. It's the fluid of the spleen, and phlegm is also made by the spleen. Phlegm became more common word in the Yuan and Ming dynasties. Anyway, so this, Chi constraint meant she wasn't moving well, so fluids weren't moving well. And then they got out of control. And this drool wrestles with chi and mutates into various conditions. So, they're interacting with each other, but not in a very harmonious way. And, drool and chi, and it just gets gross and all kinds of bad stuff can happen. Anyway, so there may be shortness of breath, palpitations, and exhaustion, or recurrent spontaneous sweating with puffy swelling of the limbs. Food is tasteless. Food is not interesting. There's kind of loss of appetite. And with heart deficiency, vexation, oppression, and no peace when sitting or lying down, which basically means they can't get comfortable. They're fidgeting no matter what position they're in. So those are the indications, or at least one set of indications for Wendan Tang. Let's look at the formula. Okay, so it has bansha. And back then, it seems like when you got herbs, you had to do some of the processing yourself, that now when you buy them, this processing is already done. So they wanted it washed with hot water 7 times to get some of the toxicity out. We don't need to do that today. Juru and Jusher, which they wanted stir fried in bran, which is usually done to remove some of the oils, which will make things less harsh, and remove the pulp. They just want it's small, but they just want the like skin. And then Jupi, which is similar to Chenpi, and many of the recipes, even the ones before this and other ones in the same book, say Chenpi rather than Jupi. They're pretty much the same thing. Maybe not exactly, but pretty much the same. Remove the white. So, it's just the citrus peel, but on the inside of citrus peel, there's some white stuff, and it wants you to remove that part. Today, you buy it and it's already done. then gansao, and here it says mixed fried, which means this character is jur, so jur gansao. Some books just say gansao without stir frying it, I mean, without honey frying it, but this one wants it honey fried, and bai fu ling, or just fu ling, white fu ling. So, as I said, in some of the earlier versions, there was no fu ling in it. Okay, so what do they want you to do? File it into powder. Okay, so they want you to powder it. Each dose is 4 large qian. So there's a normal qian and a large qian, and I don't really know. Anyway, boil that in 1.5 cups of water. This doesn't mean our modern measuring cups. This is just, like some kind of cup that they would have in their kitchen. And add 5 slices of ginger and 1 datzao. So 5 slices of ginger, that's a lot. We're warming the gallbladder. So we're adding a lot of ginger to help with the warming. Boil down to 70%. So if you put in like, X amount, if you put in 10, whatever of water, then you boil it down until there's only 7 whatevers of water, and take before meals. So note, even though it's called a tang, it's made into powder and then boiled, which actually means that you can use a smaller quantity of the herb because there's much more surface area. So when it has like making this much, that would be a lot of doses, since each dose is 4 large qian. Okay, so that's like the original recipe. And so then, these videos are supposed to be case studies. So I have, I think, 2 case studies here, both associated, both related to fright, which is one of the things that this formula treats. A 15-year-old girl suffered palpitations. That's another indication for Wendan Tang. Anyway, so let's see what else she had. She constantly felt like somebody was trying to kidnap her, or that could be read as if somebody was going to arrest her, but I don't think a 15-year-old girl was going to think about being arrested. This is like somebody grabbing you. So she felt like somebody was after her. She wanted to escape, but had nowhere to go as a 15-year-old girl. Her mother would hold her in her arms, and several female servants guarded her from outside the room, but she was still fearful and she couldn't sleep well. Insomnia is another indication for this formula. Doctors took this as a heart issue and gave her Anqian Wan, calm the spirit pill, Zhenxian Wan, settle the heart pill, and Suotang, for substances decoction. But none of them worked. And so retired scholar, okay, his name is Wang Shishan. Wang Shishan is also, kind of his chosen name for himself, but he's more commonly known as Wang Ji. And in his book, when he's writing cases, this is his case, he called himself Jusher, which is like a retired scholar or resident scholar or something like that. So I added his name in here, but he's basically saying, this is his case, and he's saying, I diagnosed her pulses, which were all thin, weak, and moderate. And so Wang said, this is gallbladder disease, heart disease, it's gallbladder disease. So he used Wendan Tang. She took it and was at ease, felt better. So this sounds like anxiety attacks, but maybe even something more. I don't know. What do you think? Sounds like to us. But it's fright, it's insomnia, it's palpitations. And so he came up with Wendan Tang. Yay. So that case is repeated in a number of case study books. Here, I took it from the original book that it was published in by, Wang Ji. But in another book where it has this same case, where it tells this same story, then afterwards, it has some discussion of it. So this other book is called Qi Zheng Hui, which is Collection of Strange Conditions, because that's kind of a strange condition, being a young woman and thinking somebody's trying to kidnap you when that probably wasn't the case. So that was in his collection, and then he had some discussion afterwards. It's possible he took the discussion from some other book, but I couldn't find it anywhere else. So this may be this person Shen Yuan's discussion. He says, you might ask, and there's this question because people do argue, well, how could the gallbladder be cold? It's a fu organ. Yang organs get hot, they don't get cold. So let's see what he has to say. Okay. The above case was a disease due to fear. Fear makes qi descend. That's when chapter 39 says fear makes qi descend, or fear descends qi. So why use Wendan Tang? That seems counterintuitive, because Wendan Tang down bears qi. Wendan Tang moves qi downward. And so whoever is explaining this says, this is Shaoyang gallbladder disease. The girl was not sick due to fear. In reality, she was fearful due to the disease. He's saying gallbladder disease came first. When the gallbladder becomes deficient, you lack courage, so you become fearful. He's saying it wasn't fear first that caused it, but it was gallbladder first. And now a symptom of the gallbladder disease is this fear. He says, it seems that gallbladder takes warmth as its proper atmosphere. This is kind of a weird statement, but he's basically saying the gallbladder likes to be warm. When the gallbladder is deficient, it's cold. Makes sense that for something to be cold, to be deficient, that often it's cold. I mean, this isn't yin deficiency. This is more like yang deficiency. She's like moving inward and afraid and wanting to hide inside. She's not manically going outward and running around or anything like that. And so, it seems he thinks that this is actually cold in the gallbladder. When it is cold, she stagnates. Stagnation engenders phlegm, or, they might use the word saliva, but stagnation engenders too much of these turbid fluids. When phlegm affects the gallbladder organ, the shen doesn't return to its abode. So the shen is like floating up above. It can't come back down because the gallbladder and the phlegm are all in the way. So this makes the person's heart fearful and they cannot sleep. And so the idea is that the shen is floating up above because it can't go home, and that this formula helps descend, which will bring the heart back down, even though it's a gallbladder formula. Well, I don't know if this makes sense to you, but that's the discussion. And at least whoever wrote this thinks that the gallbladder is cold when it's deficient. You can read about that in Bensky. He talks about that issue of, is it cold or is it warm? He leans towards gallbladder deficiency has heat, and that this warming the gallbladder doesn't really mean warming the gallbladder, but in the early books it seems to. Later on, people got all fancy in their thinking and changed their minds. Anyway, here's the second and final case study in this video. And it actually it's a long one, and it goes a long way before we get to Wendan Tang, so bear with me. Okay, it's from some book I'm not familiar with, some author I'm not familiar with. It's like medical cases from Old Virtue uh, Hall, the Hall of Old Virtues, Ancient Virtues, something like that. That's just probably the name of his that he gave his house. People would name their house, and this is probably the name of his house. So it's medical cases from his house. Somebody named Zhou Wenbo was a farmer living out in the countryside. He happened to have fever and chills, so he got external attack. He took one dose of herbs to release the exterior, and then fell into a trance-like state. His fatigue increased each day. His eyes were blank, as if he were a fool. His speech was confused. He moaned day and night. His 6 pulses were slightly weak. 6 pulses, because 3 on each side. He could not bear heavy pressure when the doctor was reading the pulse. So I, the doctor, Dr. Lee, said, great fright must be the cause of this condition. But he couldn't really question the patient very much because the patient's in a trance-like state, you know. Great fright must be the cause of this condition. It harmed his shen qi. So there's the image of his shen and his hun both flying up, not, being stored in their liver and heart organs. The shen is stored in the heart, and the heart is in charge of staying calm. The hun is stored in the liver, and the liver somehow is in charge of becoming panic stricken. And so she became disoriented. She became disordered when frightened. So Suen chapter 39 says, when frightened, chi becomes chaotic or chi becomes disordered. So, these doctors, they're, referring to things in Neijing and so forth. Probably I didn't catch all of them. So, he got the Hun wasn't hanging out in the liver like it should, and that caused him to feel panic stricken, and so he's frightened. So chi becomes disordered, and his heart lost the usual normal calmness. He said before, the heart governs staying calm. So Shenqi floated up alone without the support of, blood and the other things that it needs. And then because the Shen was floating above, then the heart's empty. So evils entered the cavern of spirit brightness. Wow, the heart. That's referring to the heart, the cavern of spirit brightness. So because of this, his Hun had no peaceful residence and drifted also. It drifted outside. So if we could calm his Shen, boost Qi, secure and conserve the true, true Qi and so forth, the parts of right Qi that are flying up or floating up, then the Hun would naturally follow the Shen's conservation and could return to its duty of clear brightness. So he's saying the Hun's duty is clear brightness, the Shen has its spirit brightness. In any case, Lingshu chapter 8 says that the Hun follows the coming and going of the Shen. So here he's referring to that, the Hun would naturally follow the Shen if we could, get that part back together. Okay, so that's his thinking. The patient then took several packages of grapey tongue, which of course nourishes the heart, spleen, and so forth. And he became quick-witted like before. He was no longer like a fool. He was no longer in a trance-like state. So he told his story. He said the disease most likely originated when he slipped and tumbled from a high place. He fell into a brook, into a stream. Then, when he was falling, he felt his shenqi jump out of his body. The brilliance of Jing became unstable. It made his wandering Hun materialize in detailed form. So it's like he could actually see his Hun in like it was a person in detail. The Hun closely resembled his own body. It was about the same height. It sometimes walked about in the air, and sometimes it lay with him in the same bed. This is what is called the Hun leaving my body. And this is absolutely true. This can really happen, he says. So from then on, he took Guipi Tong, he got better. From then on, though, if he had a little anger or fright, he would relapse. But whenever he took Guipi Tong, it would all be good. So, his Hun and his Shen were floating, and Guipi Tong restored everything back down. And when his Hun left his body, it kind of materialized, at least so that he could see it, following him around and so forth. Weird. Anyway, later he moved to the city. And while he was on the road, he met something in human form, something non-human, but it looked like a human, and somehow he could tell. Creepy. Okay, so he received a fright from this. On that evening, he started loudly shouting about killing people. The whole family was astonished and they discussed the previous herbs, guipitong. But I went there directly and I diagnosed his pulse again. It was wiry, strong, and contentious, indicating it was quite different from before. Because before his pulse had been weak and now it's wiry and strong and beating hard. And so this is definitely a different condition. This was an evil spirit taking advantage of right chi. This was not the earlier Shen deserting him and the Hun departing from him. This is something, instead of his own spirits leaving, this is something coming into him from that thing he saw on the road. Again, so creepy. So this doctor seems to believe in spirit possession, but in my research, many of the doctors really didn't believe that that happened. They believed it was due to phlegm or deficiency or something, but it seems like this doctor actually thinks there was an evil spirit. So treatment should clear phlegm and down bear fire so the evil spirit cannot act. Yeah, so we're still treating, he's not going for an exorcism, he's still treating with physical medicine, herbs and so forth. But if he makes the body like a poor place for this spirit to hang out, then the spirit will leave. If I instead use ginseng and Huangqi astragalus, that would make the spirit stick to him and that would secure the evil qi into the body. Like you don't want to supplement when there's an evil spirit in the body, I think is the message here. And it would become deep-seated chronic disease. So then I used Wendan Tang to the rescue. So here, we're gonna, this would have something to do with the Hun he kept talking about because that liver is wood element, and this would restore his courage and make it a little bit more inhospitable for the spirit, I guess. Anyway, he added some other herbs, zesuzha, huangqin, shanzhi, which is zhizi, and gualo. So he took it and slept soundly. When he woke up, the whole disease was gone, but he felt sluggish. So he ate bland porridge and he took care of himself several days, and then he got back on Guipi Tong and completely recovered. This guy sounds a little unstable to me, but it's good that, the doctor could kind of work with him and get him back to normal every time he had an episode. Okay, so those are my couple cases on Wendan Tang for this week, but the next 3 weeks I'll have more Wendan Tang cases on other topics. So today was fright. We'll have other topics like insomnia and palpitations and, various other things. Okay. Okay.